Hey, I think it's working.
I always wanted the so the university so both me and my well, that was so this was open. Sorry, not this.
If anyone has the live stream open and able to tell what the sound is working, it would be really cool. I'm assuming it will. Hello. Hi everyone. Thanks. Welcome us via live stream. If you are joining us via live stream, a little chat window next to the YouTube video we can use to have some chat. You can hashtag ES on Twitter. I am thrilled to be able to, well, first introduce myself about that. My name is Jen, and I'm the co-director of the Research in Digital Education here at the School of Education, and I'm to be hosting this talk today. This is a real pleasure for us. Audrey Waters here to Edinburgh told me this morning he hasn't been here for 30 years, so he to have her after all that time. And Audrey is an educational writer, an independent scholar, a serial dropout, a rabble-rouser, and a Cassandra. She created, probably many of you will know, in June 2010, shortly after she became a journalist. She did that because both by technology and education publications become key sources of critical insight into the US and global. And I was saying to Audrey that I know that many students on our MSc in digital exam doing. And so we're really delighted to welcome her to share these insights in person. And as of this morning, the news is that Audrey has just been named as a Spencer Fellow at the Columbia Journalism School, where she'll be continuing to develop her work in all these really important areas. And as Karen said a minute ago, this is a super prestigious fellowship. So congratulations to you, Audrey, and we're really delighted to have you here today. I'm going to hand over to you.
Excuse me while I deal with the technology. So yes, thank you for having me here. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be actually in Scotland. And this talk, I'm afraid, is very American. But I wore my politics on my T-shirt today, and my condolences for everything that you're going through as well. We can share a moment in mourning the future. As I ramble on. So the story I'm going to tell today is a bit American. I always have this sort of struggle when I travel to other places that I do spend most of my time focused on what's happening in the US. In particular, I spend a lot of time focused on what's happening in California because California seems to think of itself as like the pinnacle of the United States. Not just because of Hollywood, where I live in Los Angeles, but because of Silicon Valley, which seems to believe that it's generating all the very important ideas that will transform the future. But living in LA, I spend a lot of time thinking about cars. And for some reason, when I was preparing this talk about automation in education, I kept seeing all the headlines about self-driving cars, and it sort of shaped the direction of the talk. So forgive me in advance for that. But I want to start with a story. In December 2012, well, remember 2012, right? It was the year of the MOOC. I was summoned to Palo Alto, California, Silicon Valley, right, for a small gathering to discuss the future of teaching, learning, and technology. And I use the verb summoned quite deliberately. The event was organized by Sebastian Thrun, who at the beginning of the year had announced that he was resigning his full-time professor position at Stanford in order to launch Udacity, his online education startup. This event was held at Stanford in its artificial intelligence lab, which was a little bit of an awkward venue. Thrun still had an office there. Of course he did. But it was right next to the offices of Daphne Kohler and Andrew Ng, also Stanford AI professors who had also formed their own online education startup, a competitor to Thrun's called Coursera. So when Thrun first invited us to this event, there were about 10 of us, he promised at the end of the weekend that we would take a ride in a Zeppelin over San Francisco. And I thought, like hell I will, right? I have seen A View to a Kill, right? I know what happens to the dissenters when they get on a Zeppelin, right? As it turns out, the Zeppelin company had gone out of business. I imagine lots of people like myself can only think about Christopher Walken and Grace Jones and imagine what's going to happen to them on such a trek. So instead of a ride in a Zeppelin, Thrun took us in a ride in one of Google's self-driving cars. So Thrun, of course, Stanford professor, also Google executive. This was the project that he'd been working on when he gave his famous TED Talk in 2011 about the self-driving car. And actually at TED 2011 was where Thrun heard Salman Khan give his famous TED Talk. And it was there and then that Thrun decided that he needed to rethink his work as a Stanford professor in order to scale education to the world. So we got in the car, and Thrun drove. He steered the car onto I-280, and then the car took over. Right? And I have to say, and I say this as a professional skeptic of technology, it was this really strange combination of being utterly banal and kind of mind-blowingly impressive. I mean, it was 2012. It was the beginning of all of this hype that now we hear all the time about this future of autonomous vehicles. And the car was covered in cameras and sensors, both inside and outside. There was even a QR code on the glove compartment that I think you're supposed to like sign in with your phone and accept Google's terms of service before riding in it. And seemingly the most dangerous element of the journey was the fact that other drivers swerved and slowed down when they saw the Google car, because it had, this giant camera on top and it was plastered with Google's logos. And there was Thrun with his hands off the wheel, right? His feet were off the pedals, his eyes were not on the road. He was sort of sometimes turning around to talk to the people in the back seat animatedly. He was explaining how the car and how Google, of course, collected massive amounts of data in order to map the road and move more efficiently along it. Efficiency, right? That's the goal, we're told, of the self-driving car. You're free to insert some made-up statistic here about the percentage of space and energy that are wasted by humans, right? Humans driving and human driving patterns, and correctly the world is all Google self-driving cars instead, right? I remember Thrun had a statistic. I'm pretty sure he made it up though. But it was there and then on that trip when I had a revelation about how many entrepreneurs and many investors and many engineers like Thrun in Silicon Valley imagined education, right? Imagined the role of technology in reshaping it to suit their purposes. And that is, just like the car, right? Just like the Google Maps project, if you collect enough data, right? Lots and lots and lots and lots of data, you can build a map. Right? This is their conceptual framework for thinking about and for visualizing how learners, and they use that word to describe, right, various sort of imagined students and imagined workers and imagined consumers of education-related products, get from here to there, right? Whether it's through a course or through a degree program or towards a job. With enough data and some statistics, right, some machine learning, you can identify statistically they believe, the most common obstacles, right? You can plot the most frequently traveled path, the one that folks perhaps traverse the most quickly to get to where they're going. And you can optimize that path. Once you've trained those algorithms, you can apply them everywhere. This is their vision, right? You can scale education, just like you can scale Google Maps or scale the self-driving car. And I think we can debate this model, I mean, we should debate this model, how it works, how it doesn't work when applied to education, right? Is learning like a map, right? Is learning an engineering problem? Is really the absence of data or algorithms something that we should be concerned with? But one of the most important things, that I always try to take away from that was that this is really largely an industry's model. This is a computer scientist's model for thinking about education. This is a model of human learning by someone, in Trun's case, who claims expertise in machine learning. Right? So he's modeling how he thinks humans learn based on how he thinks machines learn. Right? And in fact, all of AI is a field that sort of aspires to model machines' minds on the human mind. So they're making all of these sort of metaphorical inferences as they move, as they model these things, making these assumptions about what learning looks like, how humans learn and how machines learn. Right? It's a model, but it's a metaphor. Right? And it's an aspiration, but it's the human aspiration. It isn't what machines want. Machines, they don't want. I think lots of us recognized, even in 2012, that despite the AI expertise in the boardrooms and the executive suites and the leadership of these MOOC companies, right, that there wasn't actually a lot of artificial intelligence in what they were doing, right? Beyond offering courses, perhaps, in AI. Right? There wasn't a lot of intelligence in the assessments. There wasn't a lot of intelligence, certainly in the course recommendations. I always get, the classes that I dropped out of, they were like, we see that you signed up for a class on education technology. Would you also like to take a class on horse biology? I go, no. No, and I didn't even click on the one in the first place. But what these MOOCs were, and what they are still, I think, is part of that larger process. There are these massive online honeypots, right, where we're being lured, where we're registering and we're watching and we're clicking and we're building these massive educational data sets that are part of that vision of mapping and building this conceptual framework for an automated education. And perhaps, perhaps, with enough data, the MOOC providers will be able to build some sort of map of professional and cognitive pathways. That's still their promise, I think. But in the meantime, promise or not, that's what they do. They're collecting a lot of this sort of driving data, if you will. And who controls the mapping data, and who controls the driving data, and who controls the autonomous vehicle patents are, of course, a small part of the many, many legal and financial battles that are brewing right now over the future of autonomous vehicles, right? Google versus Uber, Google versus Didi, which is a Chinese self-driving car company. And I think we can probably speculate what we think the analogous battles might be in education, right? Which corporation is going to sue another corporation claiming that they own the learning map, right? That they own the learning pathway, that they own the learning algorithms and the software, right? And of course, spoiler alert, it won't actually be the learners who own any of this, right? Just like it's not actually the drivers, right? Even though that's where the interesting data probably comes from, not from mapping the roads, but from mapping the traffic, right? So as we were driving along the freeways around Palo Alto in the Google autonomous vehicle, someone asked Sebastian Thrun, what happens if there's an unexpected occurrence while the car is in self-driving mode, right? And the car is constantly making adjustments, right? It's to its speed, to its distance to other vehicles, where it is in the lane. But what happens, say, if a tree suddenly crashed down on the road right in front of us, the passenger asked. And the car would stop. That's what Thrun said. The human driver would be prompted to take over. Hopefully, there's a human driver who's paying attention. Of course, the unexpected happens all the time on roads, right? The unexpected happens all the time in the classroom. But recently, the rideshare company Uber flouted the regulations in California in order to start offering an autonomous vehicle rides sharing service in San Francisco. And the company admitted that it had not addressed all the problems with their technology. There was at least one major flaw, and that was cars would make a right-hand turn through the bicycle lane, right? This would be the equivalent of a left-hand turn in the UK, right? A left-hand turn through the bicycle lane. Uber didn't have a model for recognizing the existence of bike lane or the existence of cyclist. So the car didn't see something unexpected, right? This wasn't an unexpected occurrence. The car just went on through. Right? That particular unexpected was not modeled. And that's the thing. You know, the car didn't slow, it didn't stop. It hadn't modeled for that particular problem. And in this testing phase of Uber's self-driving car, they do still have a driver sitting behind the wheel. Documents were recently obtained by the tech publication Recode, and they found that on average, these self-driving cars go less than a mile without needing the human to intervene. Technology is not that good. Right? It's just not that good. At the conclusion of our ride, Thrun steered the car back to his house. I should note, there are two cars that Google develops. One is the self-driving car for the highway, and one is the self-driving car for the city. It seems super convenient and efficient. So you have to decide which self-driving car you want. We took the one on the highway. He had to drive us back to his house, right? And there at his house, he summoned an Uber. No, he didn't summon Uber. He summoned a car service, I believe, a car service to take us back to our hotel. Really giddy from the experience, one professor who shall remain nameless, boasted to the driver what we had just done. We'd just been in the self-driving car, and he said, oh, so just put me out of a job, right? Put me out of a job, put you out of a job, put us all out of a job, right? We hear this all the time now, that this is, and we hear this with a sort of varying level of glee and sort of callousness, and some concern, right? Robots are coming for our jobs. Hear it all the time. To be fair, we've heard it for about 100 years now. Robots are coming for our job, but this time, this time, it's for real. Right? So I want to suggest, and not just because Uber has not yet developed really stellar self-driving car technology. There was just a crash of another car of theirs in Arizona on Friday. This notion is not actually a technological proclamation, right? Robots don't do anything that they're not programmed to do. Robots don't have autonomy or agency or aspirations. Robots don't just roll into the human resources department and apply for jobs, right? They aren't there to say, like, I'm really here to outperform everyone else, right? Robots don't come for our jobs, right? Business owners opt to automate instead of hiring people, right? In other words, this refrain that robots are coming for our job is not so much a reflection of a technological breakthrough or a potential technological breakthrough. It was like 10 years in the future. Not a breakthrough in automation, let alone really this is a proclamation about profits, about politics, and it's a proclamation about labor and capital. And this is as true in education as it is in driving. Right? Recode wrote in that recent article, quote, "Successfully creating self-driving technology has become a crucial factor to Uber's profitability. It would allow Uber to generate higher sales per ride since it would keep all of the fare. Uber has currently suffered losses in some markets, partly because of having to offer subsidies to attract drivers. Computers are cheaper in the long run." Right? Computers are cheaper in the long run. Cheaper for whom? Cheaper how? You know, robots don't take sick days. They don't demand retirement or health insurance benefits. You tell them the rules, and they follow the rules. They don't ask questions. They don't unionize. Right? They don't go on strike. A couple of years ago, there was a really popular article in circulation in the U.S. that claimed that the most common occupation in every U.S. state is truck driver. The data, I think, is a little iffy. The U.S. is a service economy, not really a shipping economy. But people, the article went viral. I think it touched a nerve, particularly in the light of all this talk of automating driving. And the claim about why the truck driver had persisted was, I think, kind of revealing, right? That unlike other occupations, the truck driver had not been affected by globalization, right? You needed somebody local to drive a truck. And the article claimed that truck driving had not been affected by automation. Of course, the CEO of Auto, which is a self-driving truck company owned by Uber, has said that AI will reshape trucking in 10 years. How's 10 years. Truck driving is also a profession and industry, right, that's been subject to decades of regulation. Right? There are rules about who gets to drive a truck. And that regulatory framework is just one piece of one of the objects of derision, of disruption and dismantling of the rideshare company Uber. Right? Founded in 2008, ostensibly when the CEO, Travis Kalanick, was not able to hail a cab in Paris. That's the origin story. Couldn't get a cab in Paris. Bummer, dude. Take the subway like every other human does in Paris, whatever. The company has become synonymous with the so-called sharing and gig economy, Silicon Valley's sort of latest rebranding of technology-enhanced economic precarity and job insecurity. Right? Anyone can drive for Uber, no special training or certification required. Well, asterisks, right? Anyone who's 21 or older, right, who has 3 years of driving experience and a clean driving record, who has car insurance, anyone whose car has at least 4 doors and is newer than 2001, Uber will help you buy a new car, right? Even if you have a terrible credit score, your loan payments are simply deducted from your weekly Uber earnings. All along the way, though, Uber has been really clear, despite wooing drivers to its platform, its use of independent contractors, they're not employees, is still only temporary. It's stated almost from the outset that it plans to replace its drivers with driverless cars. And since its launch, Uber has become infamous for its opposition to regulation and to unions. Uber has recently been using podcasts within the app that the drivers use in order to dissuade the drivers in Seattle from organizing, from unionizing. And I'll pause here and say, if it sounds like I'm talking way too much about self-driving cars and not about education, you're missing the point. Right? I am absolutely talking about education here. And I'm actually purposely putting these two sort of Silicon Valley disruptions side by side. I mean, after all, education is fairly regulated as well, right? Accreditation, for example, dictates really who gets to offer a real degree, right? There are rules about who gets to run a real school. Trump University is not a real school. There are rules about who gets to be in the classroom, rules about who gets to teach, rules about what's taught, right? But any semblance, particularly in the US, of job protections at the K through 12 level, at higher education level, is absolutely under attack. Again, this isn't simply about replacing teachers with computers because computers are so awesome, right? It's about replacing teachers nonetheless, right? You no longer need a teaching degree or have had any training in order to be a teacher in the state of Utah. Certification demands are still in place in universities, but they've been moving towards precarious teaching labor force for quite some time now. More than 3/4 of the teaching staff in the US are adjuncts, right? Short-term employees with no job security, no benefits. Independent contractors, just like Uber. Right? Actually, Uber encourages adjuncts, educators, to earn a little cash on the side driving for them. They have a whole marketing campaign at educators. So, like I said, I'm sure that the most prevalent job in the US is truck driver, but I do know this for sure. Union in the United States is the National Education Association. Right. The other teachers union, the American Federation of Teachers, is the largest union. Many people who work in public education are represented by the largest unions in the country, the Service Employees International Union. Silicon Valley hates unions. It loathes organized labor, just like it loathes regulations, right? For its part, again, Uber has been accused of violating regulations like the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? Refusing to pick up riders who have service dogs or wheelchairs. A fierce proponent of laissez-faire capitalism, it's received a fair amount of negative press for its price gouging, right? Surge pricing during peak demand, increasing the amount of that a ride costs in order, Uber says, to get more drivers out on the street. It's implemented surge pricing not just on New Year's Eve, but during several weather-related emergencies. The company has also actively sabotaged its rivals, attacking other ride service companies and attacking journalists. So none of this really makes the phrase Uber for education particularly appealing. Right? But that's how Sebastian Thrun described his company, Udacity, in a series of interviews in 2015. At Udacity, we built an Uber-like platform, he told the MIT Technology Review, quote, with Uber, any normal person with a car can become a driver, and with Udacity, now every person with a computer can become a global code reviewer. And just like Uber, he says, we've made the financials line up. The best earning global code reviewer makes more than $17,000 a month. Bullshit. I compare this to the typical part-time teacher in the US who teaches at college. They make about $2,000 a month. He says, we want to be the Uber of education. That's what he told the Financial Times, which added, this is its commentary, Mr. Thrun knows what he doesn't want for his company, professors in tenure, which he claims limits the ability to react to market demands. In other words, right, disrupt job protections through cheap, precarious labor force, doing piecemeal work until the algorithms are sophisticated enough to perform those tasks. And universities, good job, have taken a lot of steps towards this end without the help of algorithms or for-profit software providers. But universities are still bound by accreditation and tradition. Anyone can teach is not quite a stance on labor or credentialing, I think, that universities are prepared to make. Udacity is hardly the only company that calls itself the Uber for education. There is Peer Up, whose founder describes the company as, quote, Uber for tutors. There's Prof Hire and Adjunct Professor Link, Uber for contingent faculty. I love that. You just like call on use an app. I need someone to teach French. Be there in 5 minutes. There's the Grade Network, Uber for teaching assistants and exam markers. There's, this one's great. Parachute Teachers, which describes itself as Uber for substitute teachers. So again, we see with these services, these are companies that market on-demand labor as a kind of disruption. They reflect these larger trends, I think, in dismantling the teaching profession, defunding, deprofessionalization, adjunctification, a dismissal of expertise and experience. Anyone can teach, right? Indeed, the only ones who probably shouldn't are the ones in the classroom right now. That is how Silicon Valley approaches this frame. The right-wing think tank, the Heritage Foundation, has called for an Uberized education. The right-wing publication, the National Review, has called for Uber for education. Echoing the arguments made by the Uber CEO, these publications and many others speak of ending the monopolies that certain groups, women, I don't know, unions, liberals have on education. Ostensibly, I think on public schools, the argument is bring more competition into education. Actually, the US Secretary of Education, in a speech earlier this week, also invoked Uber as the model that education should emulate. Betsy DeVos said, just as the traditional taxi system revolted against ride sharing, so too does the education establishment feel threatened by the rise of school choice. In both cases, the entrenched status quo has resisted models that empower individuals. This is all a very familiar refrain in Silicon Valley, which has sort of cultivated its own particular brand of consumerism and capitalism wrapped up in this mantle of libertarianism. And Travis Kalanick is just one of many tech CEOs who's praised the work of objective philosopher and novelist Ayn Rand, once changing the background of his Twitter profile to the cover of her book, The Fountainhead. He told the Washington Post in a 2012 interview that the regulations that the car service industry faces bear an uncanny resemblance to Rand's other novel, Atlas Shrugged. And a quick summary for those of you who are fortunate enough to be unfamiliar with the plot. In the novel, a word I use loosely, the US has become a dystopia overrun by regulations that cause industries to collapse, innovation to be stifled. The poor are leeches, the heroes are selfish individualists and entrepreneurs. Eventually, the business leaders of the world rise up against the government, led by our hero, John Galt. The government collapses. Galt announces the industrialists will rebuild the world. It is a terrible, terrible novel, about 3/4 of which is a radio play, really bad. But it's sort of the libertarians' Bible, I guess. I've argued elsewhere, I've argued repeatedly that libertarianism is really deeply intertwined in the digital technologies, right? Those developed by Travis Kalanick, but those developed by lots of people in today's high-tech industry. And I don't mean that those industries are wielded to dismantle big government or big unions, right? But embedded in these technologies, in their design, in their development, in their code are certain ideological tenets, right? In the case of libertarianism, a belief in order, belief in freedom, work, self-governance, individualism. And that last one is key, I think, when we think about the ways in which these technologies are reshaping education, right? It's important to think about the way in which education and education technology is imagined by Silicon Valley and is built and is sort of being hard-coded by Silicon Valley, this idea of individualism. Now, obviously, right, these beliefs are rampant throughout American culture, and they have been throughout American history. Computers didn't cause neoliberalism. They didn't create libertarianisms. They just hooked them all up together on the Twitters so they could talk about their stuff. There's a particularly deep strain of individualism in American ideology, which I think contributed to libertarianism and to neoliberalism and to computers in turn. And I think that in some ways that individualism has been a real boon for the automotive industry, right? For car culture, which is really a very deeply, profoundly American thing. The love of the car. Many Americans would rather drive their own cars than rely on or fund public transportation. And I think this is Uber's great weakness and also, strangely, sort of its niche, right? Like you hail a car rather than take the bus, right? The car comes immediately, you don't have to wait. It takes you to your destination, you don't have to stop for other people. As such, you can sort of dismiss the need to develop any sort of public infrastructure, right? Some cities in the US have done this, actually outsourcing public transportation to Uber. And in your car, you can move at your own pace, right? You can move the direction you choose, where and when you want to go. In a car, you can stop and start, sure, but most often you get where you're going, in your mind at least, most efficiently. In a car, and if you watch the television ads for American car companies, you see this powerful evidence, striking imagery really, you are truly free, right? Cars are freedom to Americans. So unlike the public transportation system, the bus route, the subway line, routes that are prescribed for, right, and by the collective, the car is for you and you alone. Right? The car is another one of these radically individualistic, individualizing technologies. And I think in some ways the car is a prototype for how we can think about personalization in education. Branded, controlled, manufactured en masse, mass marketed, and yet somehow a symbol for the individual, for the personal, right? And I think that this is also, this relationship is how education is increasingly being defined, not as a collective endeavor, right? Not as a public good, but as an individual investment. Personalization is really the sort of technological reflection of that. Personalized education, right? It promises that you can move at your own pace. You can ostensibly move the direction you choose. You can stop and start, but you believe you're going to get where you're going efficiently. With personalized software, and again, if you look at the sort of parallel advertising, right? If you read the content in a publication like EdSurge or TechCrunch, you can see the sort of imaginary, right? With personalized software, the learner is truly free. Unlike the traditional routes of traditional education, the lecture hall, the classroom, those routes are prescribed for and by the collective. Right? Personalized software is for you and you alone. And the computer, like the car, is this radically individualistic, individualizing technology. And as such, I think education becomes this radically individualistic act. And I'll say this because I hate to ruin the plot of the movie for these folks who believe this, but like, you've got to be the driver. You're not in charge when the algorithm is driving. There's a number of ways I could sort of take this talk. This notion of personalization. For example, the New York Times just recently wrote about an app that Uber has called Grayball, which they were using to skirt law enforcement in new cities that they'd moved to. The app would ascertain, based on a number of data signals, who using the app were cops, right? And it would show those people a different version of Uber. They would have a personalized Uber experience, which showed them that there were no Uber cars available, right? And so, how is personalized learning, right, the automation of education through algorithms, a similar form of grayballing, right? Like, what are we showing certain students because we want them to see certain outcomes? Another piece of the sort of automation puzzle for me, for education, and I think when I hear the phrases smart car or smart home, involves what we mean by intelligence, right? What do we mean by intelligence in the phrase artificial intelligence? What are the histories and practices of intelligence? How do we perform intelligence? How do we recognize intelligence? What do we mean when we use that word? And what role have educational companies played in developing intelligence? And how does a thing like machine intelligence challenge or maybe prop up certain educational institutions? But I just want to talk a little bit more about automation and labor. Right? This issue of driverless cars and driverless school, right? And this notion that somehow freedom is increasingly an algorithmic-driven solution, one that's making us all increasingly participate in precarious labor. I am lifting the phrase driverless school from Karen Gregory, who tweeted something about the driverless university while I was preparing this talk, and it's her fault that this is the talk kind of went like, whoa, driverless university, that's exactly what they're doing, in the way in which, you know, Twitter always strips context from our utterances. I have no idea what she was talking about or referring to. I think she was at a conference. And I'm just gonna take it for my own purposes here. That's the visiting speaker's prerogative. The driverless school. I do actually think that this, in many ways, that the MOOCs, as they were envisioned by Thrun and others, was a move towards this idea of a driverless university, right? And that phrase, I think, should prompt us to ask, who's driving school now, right? Who do the education engineers imagine as driving school, right? Is it the administration, the faculty, the government, the unions, right? Who is going to be displaced by algorithms, by software that purports to make the university driverless, right? And what's important, I think, if we want to rethink how the university functions, and I'll assume we all want to rethink how the university functions in some way or another. Driverlessness doesn't actually give the faculty a greater say in governance. In fact, faculty governance seems to be one of the things that the driverless university wants to dismantle. I mean, think of Thrun's comments on tenure, right? More troubling, I think, the driverlessness of these algorithms is opaque, even more opaque than universities' decision-making processes are right now, and that is amazing because they are not transparent, right? And despite all the talk that Silicon Valley and others have said about lauding the self-directed learner, right, to those who Tressie McMillan Cottom has called the roaming autodidacts, the driverless university does not give students a greater say in their own education either. The driverless university is controlled by the engineers who write the algorithms, those who are modeling the curriculum, those who think they can best create a learning pathway for others to navigate. There's still a driver, right? But that labor and that decision-making power is obscured by algorithms. So we can see the driverless university already under development, perhaps, at the Math Emporium at Virginia Tech, which the Washington Post once described as the Walmart of higher education, a triumph in economies of scale and a glimpse at a possible future of computer-led learning. And how you can be the Walmart of higher education and a triumph, I do not understand, but I did not write the article. So this is how they describe it. 8,000 students a year take introductory math in a space that once housed a discount department store. 4 math instructors, none of them professors, lead 7 courses with enrollments of 200 to 2,000. Students walk to class through a shopping mall. Sorry, I can't even keep a straight face. Students walk to class through a shopping mall, past a health club and a tanning salon as ambient music plays. My God, that is amazing. The pass rates are up, right? That's good traffic data. I suppose, if you're obsessed with moving bodies more efficiently along this university-imagined map, right? Get the students through pre-calc, get the students done with their math requirements without having to pay for any tenured faculty or even adjunct faculty, right? In the emporium, the computer is the teacher, the Washington Post says. Students click their way through courses that unfold in a series of modules. Unfold. That's so pedal-like, except it's not natural. Students who click their way through courses seem unlikely, in my mind at least, to ever develop a deep love of math or a deep understanding of math. They are unlikely to become math majors. They're unlikely to become math graduate students. They're unlikely to become math professors. And perhaps you think this is a good thing if you believe that the world is filled with too many mathematicians, or if you believe that the study of math has nothing to offer a society that increasingly seems to want to use statistics to solve every single problem it faces, or if you think mathematical reasoning has nothing to do with 21st century life. I mean, to hell with math, right? I mean, yeah, kind of, a little bit. Literature person here. But you know, students hate the math emporium. They hate it. Despite the Washington Post's pronouncement that the time has come for computers as teachers, the time has been coming for machines as teachers for about 100 years now. Programmed instruction, teaching machines, these concepts really are about 100 years old. So to repeat myself, the push to automate education is not about technology, it's about ideology. In his autobiography, B.F. Skinner, who's largely credited for coming up with the idea of a teaching machine, said that he visited his daughter's 4th grade classroom in 1953, and he said he was struck by how inefficient it was. They're 9. I mean, anyway, he said not only were all the students expected to move through their lessons at the same pace, but when it came to assignments and quizzes, they did not receive feedback until the teacher had graded the materials. Sometimes there was a delay of days. Skinner believed that these flaws could be addressed by a machine, so he built a prototype that he displayed at a conference a year later. His idea of a teaching machine broke concepts down, he thought, into the smallest possible unit. Bite-sized learning, I believe, is today's buzzword. Students move through these concepts incrementally. Skinner thought that was great because they would make fewer mistakes, so they would be rewarded for good behavior, right? Good contingency management. This would be positive reinforcement. And he called this notion programmed instruction. Programmed instruction, like the original driverless ed tech. In acquiring complex behavior, the student must pass through a series of carefully designed sequence of steps, he wrote, often of considerable length. Each step must be so small that it can always be taken, and the student moves closer, ever closer to competent behavior. The machine must make sure that these steps are taken in the prescribed order. Driverless and programmatically constrained. Skinner had a dozen of these machines that he prototyped installed in the self-study room in Harvard in 1958 for use in teaching the undergraduate course Natural Sciences 114. Most students feel the machine study has compensating advantages, he insisted. They work for an hour with little effort. They learn more in less time with less effort than conventional ways. And we all know that if it's good for Harvard students, we should all adopt the idea. Machines such as those used at Harvard, he boasted, could be programmed to teach in part or in whole all the subjects taught in elementary and high school and many in college, the driverless university. One problem, I mean, there are many problems, but this one's significant. Harvard students hated the teaching machines, right? They found them boring. And we can say that the technology wasn't very good in 1958, but the technology is not very good now. The model for pedagogy of those machines sucked in 1958, and it's the same model today, right? Ohio State University psychology professor, and he actually came up with the teaching machine a couple decades before Skinner did, insisted that there needed to be a, quote, industrial revolution in education, right? We need to use the ingenuity of education technologies to modernize the, quote, grossly inefficient and clumsy procedures of conventional education. Work in the schools of the future, Pressey said, will be marvelously organized. So to adjust automatically to individuals' differences and characteristics of the learning process. There will be many labor-saving schemes, he said, and devices, even machines, but not for mechanizing education, for freeing the teacher and the pupil from educational drudgery and incompetence. So not replace you, teacher, to free you from drudgery, right? Just like the Industrial Revolution freed workers from the drudgery of handwork, and just like the Uber drivers have been freed by becoming part of the gig economy, Uber will free them from the drudgery of precarious employment when it replaces them with self-driving cars in about 10 years, so I hear. Teaching machines, the driverless school, will replace just some education labor at first. The bits that the engineers and the investors have deemed repetitive, menial, unimportant. Let's be honest, the bits that are a bit too liberal. Right? It doesn't seem interested in stopping students from having to do menial tasks. The driverless university still somehow mandates students sit in front of machines and click on buttons, right? Answer multiple choice questions, personalized education, but stripped of anything human and anything personal. It's a really dismal future, this driverless future, right? And not because the machines have taken over, right? But because the libertarians who build the machines have taken over. And they're wacky, right? The driverless future, right? It really offers us only more surveillance, more algorithms, less transparency, because none of us are taking math anymore, right? Fewer roads and less intellectual freedom. Skinner would love it. Skinner would love it. Trump will love it, right? But we should resist it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The people on the internet really like your slides, and there's lots of interesting things going on down there. Can I make a request of someone in the room to do me a favor and either take my machine or use yours and type questions that are being asked? Thanks, Marshall. And also let us know if any questions are coming through from, so this is the live lunch bit there. Thank you so much. Perfect. Audrey, thank you so much. That was really great, and yeah, a good combination of sort of enraging and funny, which is just what we like on a Thursday. We have lots of time, so please, I would like to open the floor to questions.
Yeah,
and
happy to field any questions, even about things that have nothing to do with cars. I mean, I think that, one of the things that I think we do is that, I think particularly in thinking about the university as an institution, I think we need to recognize the importance of the importance of relationships. I think that we need to, I hear increasingly universities in particular wanting to adopt analytics, a measurement regime. I think faculty live under one kind of measurement regime and students live under another. But I think that very little of that measurement regime actually is about caring for people, right? Caring for minds, and I think ostensibly we're supposed to care for minds at universities, but we really don't care for the person that's attached to the mind. So I think instead of thinking about algorithms, we should think about human relationships. That's trickier in a world largely of economic precarity, when increasingly we're all demanded to be doing more and more and more and more stuff, and our society cares very little, or our society values care, the practice of care, not at all, right? This is sort of emotional labor, affective labor, women's work. And it's women's work in some ways that is associated with the profession of teaching at younger levels. But I do think reinvigorating our institutions with an ethic of care instead of an ethic of counting. That's very aspirational, though. Yeah.
Anna Marshall from LTW. Edinburgh University recently purchased 20,000 licenses for lynda.com. What do you think about lynda.com, and do you think it is a good model as well in education?
What is it called?
Lynda.com.
Oh, yeah, lynda.com. Yeah, I mean, lynda.com I think that universities are making a mistake to increasingly outsource certain kinds of teaching to these third-party providers, right? I mean, if we believe, and I'm using we very loosely, if we believe that technological skills, understanding how to use a computer both for sort of simple and complex practices is a necessary part of being an educated person, a citizen, an employable worker, then I think that universities need to invest in that being a core part of what they do and hire human bodies at the university who will think about, who will be able to teach those things. I think it's a mistake if we say, oh, these are really important skills, but go learn them from Microsoft, right? Because I think once you step into the third-party provider, you are stepping into sort of it's not a MOOC honeypot, but it's the Microsoft honeypot, and sort of all of this data collection becomes not yours as a individual student, and certainly not yours as a university, but it becomes the data of a corporation. So, I mean, I think that if universities think these things are valuable, universities should invest in their people being the ones who teach them, and not Microsoft. Microsoft. Yeah.
Isn't it the case, though, that, with the economic pushes and shoves that we're getting at the moment, that whether something's taught by a machine or whether it's taught by people, is taught from the same underlying ideology? So, for instance, I can use an example of a fairly new training scheme in Scotland, which is training people how to code, and it seems to be doing it at a very kind of low level, but very intensively, and to have little care about the welfare. So, I mean, why are you so focused on machines?
I mean, I think that this is a great question, because I think that unfortunately, I think a lot of the educational software that's instructional is sort of bad teaching, and I think that in some ways it's bad teaching because that's sort of the easiest to model. The easiest to model is, and we can think about this: humans doing this and machines doing this. A model that we know is not great teaching is to stand up and say, here's an idea, and then here's a little nugget of an idea, and then here's a question. And then if you answer the question correctly, I'll give you the next nugget of idea. Like, that's just not a model for effectively dealing with a group of students who are sharing a learning experience together, who have things to contribute, who have insights of their own to contribute. It's all, these software are really built on, I'm going to talk to you or deliver you some content. Could be long, could be 3.5 minutes, and then you're going to do a quiz. It's not very exciting. It doesn't really encourage inquiry. It doesn't really recognize that students have things to contribute. It's all about the sort of drill and kill model.
But isn't that what happens, in the first and second year quite often as well?
Yeah, we should probably not do that then.
Yeah, we should probably not do it, but it does happen a lot. I don't think it's related specifically to algorithms. I mean, I worked in a company that and they hired a whole lot of teachers to break down concepts into simpler concepts so you knew where to point people. But at the end of the day, the concepts were delivered by teachers in this structured manner in the same way that they would deliver a first-year course.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, yeah, we model these. I mean, I think that a lot of this stuff is absolutely modeled on bad pedagogy, but it's bad pedagogy that humans do as well. But then when you see that as somehow the norm, and then you say, well, we're adding these new features so that you can like move through the bad pedagogy at your own pace, right? Or you can like you can rewind the crappy video and play it slower, right? Or if you really understand concept A, you can jump ahead to concept 7. It's still crap. It's just like reordered, it's just reordered. But I do think, I think that gets to the heart of this. Both the caring question and this question about pedagogy are sort of, we have a lot of rethinking to do as these as institutions, as practices. But taking bad stuff and then making it, putting it on the internet is not progress. It's just putting it on the internet. Yeah.
Well, in that sense, I was wondering, or I'm beginning to wonder when looking at various, both sort of the self-driving as well as things like course suggestion software and so on, is to what extent the engineers really are.
It's fine.
I forgot to say there's a test on Thursdays at 1 o'clock. Wasn't Wilbert's question.
Okay. Your question won the prize.
But in a way that with the kinds of machine learning that seems to be going on, is that they genuinely don't know what the box is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that, but that what it does seem to do is replicate whatever it finds.
Right.
So either the driving or whatever teaching is being going on, it just sort of scales up whatever is already entrenched.
Right. And I think that this is one of the things that makes the self-driving car to me to be a interesting way to think about this, because just because someone has driven the same path and everyone, people drive, I don't know Edinburgh well enough to sort of say what the road that everyone takes to get from here to there, but that doesn't mean it's the best path or the most interesting path. And some days you might want to be able to take a different way, but once these practices get hard-coded, it's very difficult to then choose the alternative. And then choosing the alternative is like a drop-down menu in the car that says, well, I would like to, whatever the variables that the engineer thought. It's not, I would the most efficient path to work. I would have the least amount of ads on the way. Or flowers. So constrained.
In a way, it could go even further than that. I once challenged a course selection company on this. So these were the first ones to come out with kind of predictive paths.
Mm-hmm. Was it Degree Compass? Was that
That's the one.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it might be.
That might be the one.
Anyway, what I asked them is, have they considered what the cumulative effect of running that thing on course selection would be? And they didn't. It could have all kinds of emergent properties that no one has any clue about. If an engineering system is sufficiently complex,
right,
no one has the overview of
what's gonna. Yeah, I actually have a friend who taught at the university, who teaches at the university where that was developed, and I was curious how it affected his courses because he teaches Victorian literature, and I was like, and he's a tough teacher. And so I said, does no one want to take your class anymore because you can see that the grades are lower in your class and it's Victorian literature. What's that? And he said, he's like he's like the students like it insofar as that they feel as though they're getting a better grade. Like they're going to be taking classes in which they get better grades. So the students are already selecting for things that are not about inquiry, not about curiosity. It's absolutely, like, why would I want to take Victorian? So I was like, well, you should just call all of, just make all your classes about like Sherlock, and then the students will be like, oh, we're going to read Sherlock, or we're going to watch Sherlock, and but I think that students are very practically making these decisions because they also live in this world that's about economic precarity and moving through efficiently. These aren't necessarily things that I would want to encourage as a society, but I also really do understand when you have a limited amount of, when school is as expensive as it is in the US, you might not want to linger too long in the Sherlock room. You might want to travel on to the next venue, right?
Thanks.
Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering about what seems to me to be the ultimate Uber for school example, which is alt school, which is up in Silicon Valley, this chain of micro schools and stuff. So alt school, as I understand it, comes from Max Ventilla, that Google set up and stuff, and it's got all these data analytics and what it describes as algorithmically personalized playlists and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it very, very strongly promotes a kind of student-centered ethos of inquiry-based learning, very much taps into a Deweyan form of progressivism. It calls itself, its schools are described as lab schools,
Right.
A very conscious echo of Dewey's lab school in Chicago and so on. So I just wonder, do you think there's any kind of real residue of that kind of progressivism left or available in, because you're painting a picture of the kind of drill and kill kind of personalized learning, but yet these kind of organizations suggest actually there's a very, very different way in which these kind of personalized technologies might play out, which they suggest is more progressive, also with a long kind of lineage of American education.
Right. Well, I think that alt school in particular likes to describe itself, I think, as Montessori, Montessori 2.0, and I think Reggio Emilia 2.0, and they do reference these older progressive educational models, but I'm not sure that they've really adopted the progressive parts of the education, because it's not about self-directed inquiry. It's about you have the choice of your playlist has 5 songs and you get to choose what order they play in. And I think that the schools look different, right? They've rearranged the furniture, but I'm not entirely convinced that the problem with a regimented structure of what people are learning was simply because the desks were arranged in a certain way. I think that they give a lot of lip service to these things as being progressive, but I'm not sure that students really have the leeway to be able to experiment and be curious, partially because they come with such a heavy regime of surveillance, right? So the alt school, not only are they videotaping everything, every moment in the classroom, but they're recording just the audio. And they say that, to me that just seems so stifling a place for curiosity, for child development, but for curiosity, to know that every utterance, not just every click or swipe that you're making on your iPad is tracked, but that everything you say, every facial expression, every eye roll is somehow being calculated again into these algorithms that I'm not sure the people building the algorithms have thought more about this, much more than the question of of efficiency and as an alternative to the sort of collective experience of learning that Silicon Valley finds to be really awful. I think that's a lot of, I think that a lot of people who are in education as education technology entrepreneurs it's shocking, they're men. They had experiences in school that were not pleasant themselves, see themselves as being quite gifted, young geniuses, and felt as though they didn't have opportunities to flourish because they were held back by the rest of the group. And I think that's a gendered phenomenon, as well as being any sort of recognition of how brilliant Max Ventilla is. I'm sure he's a smart guy, but I think that there's a lot of other gendered expectations on what happens when you think you're smarter than everybody, and you had to wait for other people. That really bothers the men. Ooh, hands now. Yeah, look over here.
I'm going to try and interpret a question from one of the online participants, who with devil's advocate hat firmly on asks if all either or is there some rote learning, but is there a hierarchy of what's acceptable in these ways of rote learning and what isn't acceptable in these sort of rote learning algorithmic.
Yeah, I think that there are many ways in which we could, rote learning. Learning is a process of adoption in order to get the things we have to know. What is it that we have to know? Why do we have to know those things? Perhaps we can rethink curriculum. Perhaps we can rethink what teaching looks like, so that instead of memorizing, do you call it memorizing your maths tables, multiplication tables? So instead of memorizing 2 times 2 and 2 times 3 and 2 times 4, you have a mathematical understanding that it's not a matter of memorization, that you actually sort of get how math functions and you get how math is relevant to your world, instead of it being something that you just have to memorize because there's a quiz on Thursday, that you're learning it because it matters. And it might not matter because, it might not, the reason that it matters doesn't have to be super significant or laden with, deep philosophical meaning. But it matters because, it matters in ways because it's meaningful work. We make students at K through 12 and in college do a lot of menial stuff that doesn't matter, right? And so how can we rethink teaching so they're actually doing stuff that they care about, that they're invested in, and not invested in because it's going to get them a job, or not invested in because they need to get a good grade, but invested in because they're doing important stuff. They're recognized as being not just learners, but being scholars and thinkers themselves. And that's hard. That programming, that's a harder thing to program, right?
Clara says thank you.
Thank her for the question. Yeah, you had a question.
General convention. You mentioned the Silicon Valley, the personality traits. It's basically narcissists with a big martinet complex and a chip on the shoulder. These people are driven just in debatable directions. You mentioned you bring up algorithms, and this is a big thing. Everybody talks about algorithmic thinking, yet it is by no means the only way of thinking, or even the best. To get to my question, and compositional thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I taught self-programming and started the algorithmic thinking. Then I discovered compositional thinking. A little book which I actually have in the bag that are called Mindstorms. So I'm wondering, as an old Papartian yourself, have you considered rolling up your sleeves and doing the job right before they do it wrong?
So when you say doing the job right, like which part of the job would you like? For me, like I do a different kind of piecing. I'm better at piecing together words and piecing together ideas than I am piecing together numbers. And I think that but I do. in fact, it's funny you should mention Papper, because I think that that's what makes, to me, the notion of the Uber self-driving car interesting. Is it's an interesting object to think with, right? So that's Pappert's notion of like the computer is an interesting object to think with. But I like to, I think that we can do those things without actually having to be working through them programmatically. My work, unlike a computer program, has not been checked for bugs, right? There are bugs, there are places that it doesn't work, the code doesn't run, right? I don't have that sort of check of a computer program in my ideas, so that's me. I'm a piecer together of words.
I think you'll find the programs are full of bugs as well. So
that's true. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm so highly skeptical of this, like, we're on the brink of robots taking over the world talk, is I can't even get the internet to stay on at my apartment, right? Like, I'm not sure we've actually sort of, my computer craps out all the time. My phone crashes. Things don't work, and then I go to troubleshoot, and it's like computer, like it's not even like I can't even find the logic programmatically as to why something happened. So I think that a lot of this is a fantasy about a lot of the technological proclamations are fantasies. They're science fiction stories. They are visions for a particular sort of imagined future by people who thought Ayn Rand was a good writer. Which means that they're not very good. The plot development really makes no sense. There's no character development, but they're real strong on ideas like, yay, money. And so I think that, I spent a lot of time listening to the stories out of Silicon Valley, not because I think that they're right, but because they have a lot of money and power telling these stories currently. I think that we find, and Americans in particular, find these stories very compelling because it triggers all of the yay science, technology, and gadgetry kind of things that for some reason Americans are really susceptible to. And any story that tells you that's about the American individual, the primacy of the individual over the collective, Americans tell a lot of those stories, the importance of the individual, the expense of the collective, do not play as well in other places, parts of the world that kind of rabid individual that folks from Silicon Valley have. For one another, with healthcare, man, don't screw up. But other places seem to care about one another in ways that America. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your paper. I really enjoyed it. And I think what you portray is really a utopia as well that we're experiencing.
We are in it.
But and I think you which was a yay money is a really important one actually, because the economic driver and the neoliberal drivers for this are very strong. And they're also driving the UK government because there are a lot of projects that go along analytics and reductivity. But what can worry me, I can worry of the dystopia is that it encourages to forget some of the very basic principles in education. I mean, I noticed that lynda.com, which I never heard of, so thank you for that. The other person in the room that mentioned them, they conflate education and training.
Yes.
And lynda.com seems to be very it's all about training. So my worry is we're forgetting that there is a strong affective part of
Mm-hmm.
and effectiveness is really how people feel. The peer learning is very important. So while we can do a lot of learning
And machines don't care. They don't care. We can program them with certain signals, but machines are not effective in that way. The training thing you just made, the training piece, I think, is actually also connected very much to the way in which this idea of artificial intelligence is seeping into which we're imagining intelligence, which is odd, but perhaps not. But training is a word that's used a lot in computer science to talk about how you develop an algorithm. You train the algorithm, and of course, training is also pretty, Skinner was all about training as well. So there are other elements, I think, within the history of education in thinking about education simply a matter of training. Automated, voice-operated, virtual assistant, way you can order on.com with your voice. Huge technological. You don't have to go to the website. You can just order me. But new things, the training its skills. So Alexa's capabilities are talked about with the same kind of language. Things that we go to lynda.com. You're going to go to lynda.com to learn skills like Photoshop or program device in your room with a particular skill. And so language is really free, I think, in the way I'm talking about has really significant implications for how we imagine education to function. I think a lot about the play on the word teaching machines isn't simply that we have machines that teach or machines that purport to teach, but increasingly we also expect humans to be in the role of teaching their machines to do things. You teach Facebook, right, by liking or disliking things. You teach Netflix based on what you watch. But then also, as such, it's also not that artificial intelligence gets better and better. It's that humans become more and more like automatons, right? We're actually becoming more and more machine-like as well, I think. And so that's the other part of teaching machines, is the sort of rote and repetitive ways in which we not just think about ourselves in school, but think about ourselves in work and in life. We drive the same path to work. We do the same tasks. Our lives are becoming less about poetry and love and freedom. They're becoming more about sort of mechanistic decisions as well. So that's really grim. Sorry, someone ask a happy question.
Just to say, I think maybe we'll just take one more. Sorry about that.
Okay.
You can choose, Audrey. Who do you want the last one?
Well, right here.
Okay, I'll fess up. I'm probably the only techno-utopian libertarian in the room.
That's why I chose you. No.
But I still don't read Ayn Rand.
It's bad.
Okay, I think techno-utopians see this is all an interim phase anyway. What we want is to plug in a lead and upload knowledge into the brain. And I would see that as fantastic because I haven't got time in life to learn everything. And, I'm curious. I want to know more. And the faster I can do that, the more I can learn.
So I think that is a really compelling vision. In fact, Elon Musk, the co-founder of PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, announced this week that he's working on a project to connect AI to the brain. Right? This is Ray Kurzweil's vision. I think that this is the vision, of course, of the Wachowski sisters in The Matrix, right, where Neo gets the thing and then he knows kung fu, which is cool because learning kung fu is just not, I don't have I don't have time, for sure. So I understand that that there is so much to be curious about, and humans are curious creatures. And so again, but this is a powerful story, but I'm not sure it's grounded in much other than science fiction. Like I don't think that knowledge is actually data, the way in which it's conceived in, like I don't think you can actually write a program for Kung Fu and then I stick it in my cortex and I know Kung Fu. I mean, our bodies are involved with knowledge, our experiences are involved with knowledge. Knowledge isn't simply an input, right? It's not simply a data point, and I don't know that that thing is achievable. But I mean, by all means, Elon, you've got money. Do that. You're not building weapons. So he is still working for Trump. But no, I think it's a really powerful story. And I think that was, I think that's, when I had this very strange weekend summoned by Sebastian Thrun, it was the story that he also really believed, like why would you not want to be able to learn everything you needed to know about French in 10 minutes? And I said, because living in Paris for a year is way cooler. And I'm more of a spend a year in Paris and learn French, and Sebastian Thrun is like, give me the learning pill, and then I'll market it. So, okay. Great. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. That was great.
Yeah, thank you. As Audrey says, thank you very, very much for coming, and thank you, Audrey, for a really excellent session. If you are not on the email list for the digital education seminars and you would like to be, there's a little piece of paper in there that you can write your email address on. It's great to see everyone. Have a lovely day. Thank you.